The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and orange as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his tactical gear one final time. His SEAL team, call sign Bravo 6, had been operating in the Khyber province for 3 weeks now, hunting high-value targets along the Pakistan border. The intelligence reports suggested a Taliban commander named Khalil Ahmad was hiding in a compound just 12 kilometers from their current position. Rodriguez looked at his 5 teammates as they prepared for what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. There was Petty Officer Jake Thompson, their communications specialist, whose steady hands had saved them from countless close calls. Next to him sat Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Kim, the team medic who could patch up a bullet wound while under fire without breaking a sweat. Chief Petty Officer Michael Santos served as their demolitions expert, his knowledge of explosives unmatched in their unit. The youngest member, Petty Officer First Class Ryan Mitchell, handled their advanced surveillance equipment with the skill of someone twice his age. Finally, there was Chief Warrant Officer Alex Carter, their team leader, a veteran of 4 deployments who had earned the respect of every man under his command. Carter spread out the aerial photographs on a makeshift table constructed from ammunition crates. The target compound sat in a valley surrounded by steep rocky hills, with only one main access road winding down from the north. The structure itself appeared to be a traditional Afghan home with thick mud walls and a flat roof, perfect for defensive positions. Intelligence suggested that Ahmad used this location as a safe house when moving between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The plan seemed straightforward enough. They would approach from the eastern ridge under cover of darkness, establish an observation post, and gather intelligence on the compound's inhabitants and defenses. If Ahmad was confirmed to be present, they would call in additional support for a capture operation. If not, they would withdraw and continue their search elsewhere. As the team loaded their equipment into 2 modified vehicles, Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Each man carried specialized gear for their role, from Thompson's advanced radio equipment to Kim's medical supplies. Santos had packed enough explosives to level a small building, while Mitchell's surveillance gear could capture clear images from over a mile away. Carter, as always, carried the burden of command along with his weapon. The drive to their insertion point took nearly 3 hours over rough mountain terrain. They avoided the main roads, following goat paths and dried riverbeds to minimize their chances of detection. The landscape around them grew increasingly desolate as they climbed higher into the mountains, with jagged peaks towering above them like ancient guardians. They reached their insertion point just as the sun began to set behind the western peaks. The team quickly unloaded their equipment and performed final equipment checks. Each man verified his weapon systems, communications gear, and emergency supplies. Carter synchronized their watches and reviewed the emergency extraction procedures one more time. The hike to their observation point would take approximately 4 hours through treacherous mountain terrain. They moved in single file, maintaining tactical spacing and complete noise discipline. Rodriguez led the way, using his extensive knowledge of mountain warfare to navigate the rocky slopes and avoid loose stones that might give away their position. As they climbed higher, the temperature dropped significantly. The thin mountain air made each step more difficult, but the team pressed on with the determination that had carried them through countless missions before. They paused every 30 minutes to check their position and scanned for any signs of enemy activity in the valley below. The compound came into view just after midnight. It sat in the center of the valley like a small fortress, with lights visible in several windows. Mitchell immediately began setting up his surveillance equipment while Thompson established communications with their base. Kim and Santos took up security positions, their weapons trained on the approaches to their location. Carter studied the compound through his night vision scope, noting the presence of several armed guards patrolling the perimeter. This was definitely not an ordinary civilian residence. The level of security suggested that someone important was indeed using this location as a safe house. Rodriguez settled into his position behind a large boulder, his rifle ready as he scanned the surrounding terrain. Something about this mission felt different, though he could not quite identify what was bothering him. Perhaps it was the isolation of their position, or maybe it was the unusually heavy security around the target compound. Whatever it was, his instincts were telling him to stay alert. The first 3 hours of surveillance passed without incident. Mitchell's cameras captured clear images of the guards rotating their shifts every hour, and Thompson maintained steady communication with their command base. The team had identified at least 8 armed men around the compound, all carrying AK-47 rifles and wearing traditional Afghan clothing mixed with military gear. Carter was reviewing the intelligence photographs when Mitchell spotted movement on the northern approach road. A convoy of 3 vehicles was making its way down the mountain path toward the compound. Through his high-powered scope, Rodriguez could see that each vehicle was packed with armed men. Thompson immediately radioed their base with an update about the new arrivals. The response came back quickly and was not what they expected. Intelligence sources had intercepted communications suggesting that their presence in the area had been compromised. The Taliban had somehow learned about their mission and was moving additional fighters into position. As if to confirm their worst fears, Santos spotted muzzle flashes on the ridge line to their south. Enemy fighters were moving to surround their position. Carter made the decision that probably saved their lives. They needed to move immediately before the trap could be completed. The team quickly gathered their essential equipment, leaving behind anything that was not absolutely necessary. Mitchell packed up his surveillance gear while Thompson prepared to destroy their communications equipment if capture seemed imminent. Kim checked his medical supplies, and Santos made sure his explosives were secure. They began moving west along the ridge line, hoping to reach a secondary extraction point that had been identified during their mission planning. The terrain was even more treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks and steep drop-offs threatening to send them tumbling into the valley below. Rodriguez was leading the way when he heard the distinctive sound of rifle bolts being pulled back somewhere ahead of them. He immediately dropped to the ground and signaled for the others to take cover. Through his night vision scope, he could see at least 6 enemy fighters positioned along their intended escape route. Carter quickly assessed their situation and realized they were in serious trouble. Enemy forces were approaching from the south and east, while their escape route to the west was blocked. The only direction that appeared to be clear was north, but that would take them deeper into Taliban-controlled territory, with no chance of reaching their extraction point. Santos suggested using his explosives to create a diversion, but Carter knew that would only reveal their exact position to every enemy fighter in the area. They needed a different solution, and they needed it quickly. Mitchell was scanning the northern ridge line with his scope when he noticed something unusual. There was a small cave or rock formation about 200 meters up the slope that might provide temporary shelter. It was not much, but it was better than remaining exposed on the open ridge. The team began moving toward the cave, staying low and using every available piece of cover. Thompson maintained radio contact with their base, hoping that air support might be available despite the remote location and difficult terrain. They had almost reached the cave when Rodriguez heard the unmistakable sound of boots on loose rock behind them. The enemy had discovered their trail and was closing in rapidly. He turned to signal the others when the first shots rang out across the mountainside. Bullets struck the rocks around them, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. Kim cried out as a piece of stone cut his cheek, but he kept moving toward the shelter of the cave. Santos returned fire with short, controlled bursts, trying to slow down their pursuers without revealing their exact position. They reached the cave entrance just as more enemy fighters appeared on the ridge line above them. Carter realized with growing dread that they had walked into a carefully planned ambush. The Taliban had been tracking their movements since they had left their base, and now they were being herded into a killing zone with no way out. The cave was larger than it had appeared from a distance, extending back into the mountain for about 30 meters. There was only one entrance, which meant they would not be flanked, but it also meant they were trapped if the enemy decided to wait them out or use explosives. Mitchell set up his remaining surveillance equipment near the cave entrance, while Thompson tried to establish better communication with their base. The mountains were interfering with their radio signals, making it difficult to coordinate any rescue attempt. Rodriguez took up a defensive position where he could watch the approaches to the cave. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters moving into position on the surrounding ridges. They were being surrounded by at least 20 Taliban fighters, all armed with automatic weapons and probably rocket-propelled grenades. Carter gathered his men for a quick conference in the back of the cave. Their ammunition was limited, their communications were unreliable, and they were outnumbered at least 4-1. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and they needed to come up with a plan before the enemy decided to attack their position. Santos suggested that they could use his remaining explosives to collapse part of the cave entrance, creating a more defensible position while hopefully blocking some of the incoming fire. Kim pointed out that they had enough medical supplies to treat minor wounds, but anything serious would be beyond his capabilities in their current situation. Thompson finally managed to establish contact with their base and receive the news they had been dreading. Air support was not available due to bad weather moving into the area, and the nearest ground units were at least 6 hours away. They were completely on their own. The first attack came just before dawn. Rodriguez heard shouting and Pashto echoing across the mountainside, followed immediately by the sharp crack of rifle fire. Bullets struck the rocks around the cave entrance, creating a deadly shower of stone fragments and sparks. Carter positioned his men at strategic points around the cave entrance, making sure each person had good cover and clear fields of fire. Rodriguez and Mitchell took positions on either side of the opening, while Santos and Kim covered the flanks. Thompson remained in the back of the cave, trying to maintain communication with their base and coordinate any possible rescue attempts. The enemy fire intensified as more fighters joined the assault. Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from at least 15 different positions on the surrounding ridges. The Taliban fighters were using classic mountain warfare tactics, firing from cover positions, and then moving to new locations before return fire could be effective. Santos spotted movement on a ledge about 100 meters away and took careful aim with his rifle. His shot echoed across the valley, and they saw one of the enemy fighters fall backward into the rocks. The return fire was immediate and overwhelming, forcing all of them to duck deeper into the cave for protection. Kim crawled over to where Mitchell was positioned and noticed blood seeping through the young sailor's sleeve. A rock fragment had sliced through his uniform and opened a gash on his upper arm. Kim quickly applied a field dressing while Mitchell continued to scan the enemy positions through his scope. The attack continued for nearly an hour before the enemy fire began to slacken. Rodriguez realized that the Taliban fighters were probably low on ammunition and would need to resupply before launching another assault. This might be their only chance to improve their defensive position. Carter made the decision to send Santos and Kim to the back of the cave to search for any additional exits or defensible positions. The cave extended further into the mountain than they had initially realized, with several smaller passages branching off from the main chamber. While Santos and Kim explored the cave system, Rodriguez maintained watch at the entrance. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters moving supplies up the mountain paths. The Taliban was clearly preparing for a prolonged siege, which meant his team needed to find a way out before they were completely surrounded. Mitchell was adjusting his scope when he noticed something unusual on the northern ridgeline. There was a small flash of reflected sunlight from what appeared to be an optical device. Someone else was watching the battle, but from a position that was not occupied by Taliban fighters. He pointed out the location to Rodriguez, who studied it carefully through his own scope. There was definitely someone on that ridge, but they were too far away to identify clearly. The position offered an excellent view of the entire valley and all the surrounding areas. Thompson finally managed to establish better communication with their base and received updated intelligence about their situation. Satellite imagery showed that Taliban reinforcements were moving toward their position from multiple directions. Within a few hours, they would be facing at least 50 enemy fighters with heavy weapons. Santos and Kim returned from their exploration of the cave with disappointing news. There were no other exits, and the back passages were too narrow to provide any tactical advantage. They were definitely trapped in their current position with no way out except through the enemy forces surrounding them. Carter gathered his men for another conference as enemy fire began to pick up again outside. Their ammunition was running low, they had no air support available, and ground reinforcements were still hours away. The situation was becoming desperate, and they needed to consider all available options. Rodriguez suggested that they could try to break out during the next lull in fighting, using Santos's explosives to create a diversion while they moved toward the northern ridge. It was a dangerous plan with little chance of success, but it might be better than waiting for the enemy to overwhelm their position. Mitchell disagreed, pointing out that they had seen additional enemy movement on the northern approaches. Breaking out in that direction would probably lead them directly into another ambush. He suggested that they should try to hold their position until air support became available. The debate was interrupted by a massive explosion that shook the entire mountainside. Rocks fell from the cave's ceiling, and the sound of automatic weapons fire intensified dramatically. Through the cave entrance, they could see smoke and dust rising from the valley floor near the target compound. Thompson was frantically working his radio, trying to determine what had caused the explosion. The response from their base was confusing. No friendly forces were in the area, and no airstrikes had been authorized. Something else was happening in the valley below. Santos crawled to the cave entrance and peered carefully around the edge. The target compound was partially destroyed, with flames visible through several windows. Taliban fighters were running in all directions, some toward the compound and others toward defensive positions. Rodriguez joined Santos at the cave entrance and immediately noticed that the enemy fire directed at their position had decreased significantly. Many of the Taliban fighters were apparently responding to whatever had happened at the compound, leaving fewer men to maintain the siege of their cave. Kim suggested that this might be their opportunity to attempt a breakout, while the enemy forces were distracted and disorganized. Carter agreed that the timing was better than it had been, but he was still concerned about the unknown factors that had caused the explosion. Mitchell continued to watch the northern ridge line through his scope, try to identify whoever was positioned there. The mysterious observer had not moved from their location, despite all the activity in the valley below. Something about the situation did not make sense. Thompson received another radio message that added to their confusion. Intelligence sources were reporting unusual radio chatter from Taliban units in the area, suggesting that they were under attack from an unknown force. The enemy fighters seemed to be just as surprised by recent events as Rodriguez's team was. Carter made the decision to wait and observe before committing to any course of action. The situation was changing rapidly, and he wanted to understand what was happening before risking his men's lives in a potentially unnecessary breakout attempt. The next explosion came 30 minutes later, this time from the eastern ridge where several Taliban fighters had taken positions. Rodriguez watched through his scope as enemy combatants scrambled for cover, obviously confused and frightened by the precision of the attacks. The explosions were too accurate to be random artillery fire, and there were still no friendly aircraft in the area. Mitchell suddenly gripped Rodriguez's shoulder and pointed toward the northern ridge. Through his high-powered scope, he had finally gotten a clear view of the mysterious observer. It was a single person in military gear, positioned behind what appeared to be a high-powered rifle with an advanced scope system. Carter quickly moved to Mitchell's position and took a look through the scope himself. The person on the ridge was definitely not Taliban. The equipment was too sophisticated and the position was too well chosen for tactical observation. Someone else was operating in their area, someone with professional military training. Thompson tried to raise the unknown person on military radio frequencies, but received no response. Whoever was maintained complete radio silence while continuing to observe the battle through their scope. The mysterious sniper seemed to be evaluating the situation just as carefully as Carter's team was. Santos noticed that the Taliban fighters were becoming increasingly agitated and disorganized. Their radio chatter had increased dramatically, with multiple voices shouting commands and requests for information. Something had clearly disrupted their carefully planned ambush, and they were struggling to regain control of the situation. The third explosion targeted a group of enemy fighters who had been setting up a heavy machine gun position on the western ridge. The blast was so precise that it eliminated the weapon crew without damaging the surrounding rocks. Rodriguez realized that they were witnessing the work of an extremely skilled marksman with access to specialized ammunition. Kim crawled over to where Carter was positioned and pointed out that the enemy fire directed at their cave had almost stopped completely. The Taliban fighters were now focused on defending themselves against the unknown sniper rather than maintaining their siege. This was definitely their best opportunity to attempt a breakout. Carter studied the terrain between their position and the northern ridge where the mysterious sniper was located. The distance was approximately 400 meters across rocky ground with limited cover, but the route was no longer covered by enemy positions. If they moved quickly and stayed low, they might be able to reach a more defensible position. Rodriguez checked his remaining ammunition and confirmed that he had enough rounds for a running firefight, if necessary. Each member of the team performed similar equipment checks, making sure they were ready to move at Carter's command. Mitchell packed up his remaining surveillance equipment, while Thompson prepared his radio gear for transport. Santos gathered his explosives, and Kim secured his medical supplies. They were down to essential equipment only, but they still had everything necessary to survive and fight. The fourth explosion came from the southern approach, where Taliban reinforcements had been moving up the mountain path. Through his scope, Rodriguez could see several enemy vehicles burning in the distance. The mysterious sniper was systematically eliminating the Taliban's tactical advantages and support positions. Carter made the decision to move while the enemy forces were still confused and disorganized. He gave his team final instructions about spacing, movement techniques, and rally points in case they became separated during the breakout attempt. They left the cave in single file, with Rodriguez leading the way and Santos bringing up the rear. The rocky terrain made movement difficult, but it also provided excellent cover from any remaining enemy positions. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding loose stones that might create noise or cause them to lose their footing. Halfway to their objective, Thompson spotted Taliban fighters moving toward their previous position from the east. The enemy had apparently discovered that the cave was no longer occupied and was attempting to pursue them. Santos turned and fired several shots to discourage the pursuit, buying valuable time for the rest of the team. Mitchell noticed that the mysterious sniper had changed positions and was now covering their movement across the open ground. Several enemy fighters who attempted to intercept them were eliminated by precise long-range shots before they could pose a serious threat. They reached a cluster of large boulders about 200 meters from the northern ridge and took cover to assess their situation. Behind them, they could see Taliban fighters searching the area around the cave, apparently trying to determine which direction they had gone. Ahead of them, the slope leading up to the sniper's position was steep, but manageable. Kim treated Mitchell's arm wound more thoroughly now that they had better cover and lighting. The cut was deeper than initially thought, but it had stopped bleeding and would not impair his ability to fight. Santos distributed ammunition to ensure that everyone had enough rounds for the next phase of their escape. Carter decided to attempt contact with the mysterious sniper using hand signals rather than radio communication. He exposed himself briefly and used standard military gestures to indicate their friendly status and request permission to approach the position. The response came immediately in the form of precise hand signals that confirmed military training and friendly intentions. The sniper indicated a safe route up the ridge and warned them about enemy positions that were not visible from their current location. Rodriguez led the team up the slope toward the sniper's position, following the indicated route carefully. The climb was exhausting after hours of combat and stress, but they pushed forward with determination. Behind them, they could hear Taliban fighters shouting as they discovered the team's trail. As they approached the ridge line, Rodriguez could finally see their mysterious benefactor clearly. It was a woman in military fatigues with sophisticated sniper equipment, including a rifle that he did not recognize. Her gear appeared to be non-standard issue, suggesting that she was either special operations or working with a different military organization entirely. The sniper gestured for them to take cover behind a rock formation while she continued to observe the enemy movements below. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters regrouping and organizing a pursuit effort. The situation was still dangerous, but their tactical position had improved dramatically. Carter approached the sniper carefully and identified himself and his team. Her response confirmed that she was a friendly operator, but she provided no details about her unit or mission. She had been observing the area when she noticed their predicament and decided to provide assistance. Thompson was finally able to establish clear communication with their base and request immediate extraction from their current position. The weather had cleared enough for helicopter operations, and air support was now available if needed. The mysterious sniper introduced herself simply as Sierra and explained that she had been conducting a separate reconnaissance mission in the area when she observed their situation developing. Her equipment and tactics suggested extensive special operations training, but she declined to provide details about her unit or command structure. Sierra's rifle was unlike anything Rodriguez had seen before. A custom-built precision weapon with an advanced scope system and specialized ammunition designed for maximum accuracy at extreme ranges. She had been systematically eliminating Taliban positions from over 800 meters away, using terrain features and wind patterns that most snipers would consider impossible shooting conditions. Carter coordinated with Thompson to establish a secure landing zone for their extraction helicopter, while Sierra continued to provide overwatch. The Taliban fighters below were still searching for them, but they seemed reluctant to venture too far up the mountainside after losing so many men to the precision fire. Kim used the opportunity to provide more thorough medical treatment for Mitchell's wound and check the rest of the team for injuries. Santos had sustained a minor cut on his hand from rock fragments, but everyone else was uninjured despite hours of intense combat. Sierra reported that she had eliminated at least 12 enemy combatants during the engagement, significantly reducing the Taliban forces' combat effectiveness. Her intervention had probably saved the lives of Carter's entire team by preventing them from being overrun in the cave position. Thompson received confirmation that their extraction helicopter was airborne and would reach their position within 20 minutes. The pilot reported that he could see smoke from the destroyed Taliban positions and requested information about enemy air defense capabilities in the area. Sierra informed them that she had not observed any heavy weapons or surface-to-air missiles during her surveillance of the area. The Taliban fighters appear to be equipped only with small arms and rocket-propelled grenades, which pose minimal threat to a properly escorted helicopter. Rodriguez continued to monitor the approaches to their position while the rest of the team prepared for extraction. The Taliban forces below seemed to be withdrawing toward the valley floor, apparently deciding that pursuing them up the mountainside was too costly given the presence of the unknown sniper. Santos gathered intelligence materials and equipment that might be useful for future operations in the area. Mitchell's surveillance gear had captured valuable information about Taliban tactics and equipment that would help other units operating in the region. Sierra began packing her equipment as well, but she indicated that she would not be leaving with their helicopter. Her mission was not yet complete, and she had her own extraction arrangements. Carter offered to coordinate her departure with their command, but she politely declined any assistance. The sound of rotor blades echoed across the mountains as their rescue helicopter approached the landing zone. Thompson guided the aircraft to their position using standardized radio procedures, while Sierra provided additional security overwatch from her elevated position. Kim helped Mitchell prepare for transport, ensuring that his wounded arm was properly immobilized for the helicopter ride. The rest of the team gathered their essential equipment and prepared to move quickly to the aircraft once it landed. Sierra suddenly raised her rifle and fired a single shot toward the southern ridge. Through his scope, Rodriguez saw a Taliban fighter with an RPG fall backward into the rocks. She had eliminated the threat before anyone else had even noticed it, demonstrating reflexes and situational awareness that impressed even experienced special operations personnel. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris, with its crew chief immediately establishing a defensive perimeter around the aircraft. Carter's team moved quickly toward the helicopter while Sierra maintained her overwatch position. As Rodriguez reached the aircraft, he turned back to signal his thanks to Sierra. She acknowledged his gesture with a brief nod before returning her attention to the scope of her rifle. She would remain in position until they were safely away from the area. Thompson provided the helicopter crew with updated intelligence about enemy positions and movements in the valley below. The pilot acknowledged the information and began preparing for immediate departure once all personnel were aboard. Kim secured Mitchell in one of the helicopter's medical seats and began more comprehensive treatment of his wound during the flight. Santos and Rodriguez took positions near the aircraft's windows, maintaining security during their departure from the hostile area. As the helicopter lifted off and began flying toward their base, Rodriguez caught one final glimpse of Sierra through his window. She had already resumed her mission, whatever it was, and was moving along the ridge line with the fluid movements of someone completely comfortable in mountain warfare environments. Carter debriefed with Thompson during the flight, reviewing the lessons learned from their mission and the unexpected encounter with the mysterious sniper. They had accomplished their original reconnaissance objectives despite the ambush, and the intelligence they gathered would be valuable for future operations. The helicopter reached their forward operating base without further incident, where medical personnel immediately began treating Mitchell's arm wound more thoroughly. Kim's field treatment had been excellent, but the cut required several stitches and would keep Mitchell off active duty for at least a week. Santos began preparing his after-action report while Rodriguez cleaned and inspected his weapons and equipment. The mission had been successful despite the challenges they faced, largely due to Sierra's timely intervention and professional assistance. Carter met with their commanding officer to provide an initial briefing about their mission and the mysterious sniper who had saved their lives. Intelligence officers were already working to identify Sierra and determine which unit she belonged to, but Rodriguez suspected they would not find any answers. Later that evening, as Rodriguez was writing his own mission report, he reflected on the events of the past 24 hours. They had started with a routine reconnaissance mission and ended up in a desperate fight for survival, only to be rescued by a ghost-like sniper who appeared and disappeared without explanation. He never learned Sierra's real identity or saw her again during his remaining deployments, but he never forgot the lesson she had taught him about the importance of supporting fellow warriors in combat, regardless of unit affiliations or mission parameters. Sometimes the most important victories came from unexpected sources.